Thank you. Mr. Hun, what have been, your thoughts with respect to this sort of bivalent relationship and dynamic that we have here, being local but also of extreme critical importance to the binational relationship and also the international scenario?
Well, I guess I like, as a lifelong resident of the border, my views are obviously shaped by that. And I like to look at or try to focus on barriers to our success. I mean, and the success being how do we close an income gap, a quality of life, a competitiveness gap that is developed, as Congressman O'Rourke alluded to. I mean, at one point we had an income level, an education level that was significantly above the state and on par with the nation, and we lost that competitiveness along the way. And so as I look today as barriers, what can we do and what do we need to take ownership? I think one thing that I've focused on more recently is the difference between the perception, particularly on the U.S. side, of the border and the reality of the border. And what I've noticed as you move away from the border, because I think my perception of reality is pretty close to reality, but you don't have to go very far, Dallas or Houston, and you begin to have a gap. And the farther you go, perhaps the bigger the gap. And what that gap is really allowed to develop is, for our political class, those that need votes for various reasons to win elections, they've used that gap for their own purposes. And in so doing, they have reinforced, because this perception, I think, as we move away from the border, from reality, has not been a positive difference, it's been a negative difference. So to essentially demagogue this issue and a negative perception of the border for their own interest has reinforced a barrier for us to be competitive and to attract investment, which creates jobs, particularly to create jobs that allows us to move up the ladder as far as pay and complexity and the educational requirements that go along with that. So, and I guess my conclusion has been, if my analysis is correct, there's nobody going to fix that for us but ourselves. In other words, we have to take ownership of the gap between how the rest of the United States views the border and how what we see as the border is reality. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be working at reality. We should be working in that, and we do all the time. But no matter how we make progress there, this gap is going to continue, at least in my way, to undercut our ability to be as competitive, to reach our full potential.
Thank you. And Ms. De La Vega Foster, I know you've been involved with several key initiatives with respect to this kind of activities that Mr. Hunt was saying. What are your thoughts on that? What kind of tools can we use, or what kind of methods can we apply in order to alleviate any of those kinds of misperceptions?
Well, I think definitely the best one is that we sit down and talk about the issues and try to work together and not let the sometimes negative political rhetoric damage that relationship. Because sometimes, if you hear Trump talking, for instance, why would Mexicans sit down with Americans to solve anything? But we need to understand and isolate, and that's not the Americans' point of view. So we need to really look beyond that, and especially on the border, and talk about the issues that connect us, and talk about how we build more bridges. And I'm not specifically asking for more infrastructure. I'm talking about bridges that connect us in economic development, but also in social development. I think if we could really talk about a North American bloc and develop together and learn from each other, then the issues of immigration and all these other issues would be far less important, because people migrate looking for better opportunities. If we can be able to really push Mexico and its social and economic development, we wouldn't be talking about immigration problems. So I think the best solution, like any problem, is to sit down and have the ability to listen to each other and to understand the different points of view and what is that common good that can lead us to find solutions. For example, in the manufacturing sector, the US has a very important presence in Mexico, but we need to understand how we can, and talk about how we can create a vertical integration of product, process, services, and not only stay in that cheap labor manufacturing. So it's together, we're neighbors. And sometimes a talk would seem like it's, no, let's build a bigger barrier. But we can function without each other. And when we really acknowledge that we are each other's best asset, I think then we'll be able to find the solutions.
Yes, and that makes me think of a question for Senadora Cuevas Barron. We here in the United States often hear a lot of rhetoric very loudly from certain sectors of the relationship or the thoughts that certain people in the United States have with respect to Mexico, and particularly in Congress. The Congressman O'Rourke, amongst others, have done a tremendous job of trying to really reach out to his colleagues and to other people in the United States Congress, both in the Senate and the House, to show them about not only our intrinsic value that we have here, but also the value on the border that we have to the US-Mexico relationship. Tell us maybe a little bit about the thoughts of your colleagues in the Senate, in la Cámara de Diputados. What are their thoughts with respect to the United States, and in particular this border dynamic we have here with Ciudad Juárez and El Paso?
La dinámica de Washington y de la Ciudad de México no es tan distinta. En realidad cometemos los mismos errores. Y es pensar que desde la distancia a la frontera se pueden tomar buenas decisiones para una frontera que se desconoce por la mayor parte de los legisladores. Ese me parece que es el primero de los errores. No se puede legislar sobre aquello que no conocemos. Si bien la forma de verlo para muchos es que Norteamérica, y concretamente la relación entre México y Estados Unidos, tiene ya un andamiaje institucional muy sólido, la realidad es que sí es sólido en ciertas áreas. Es sólido en la parte comercial, es sólido en el intercambio de bienes, de servicios, de capitales, pero no lo es en los temas humanos. Nos olvidamos que el centro de la política debe estar justamente en las personas. Y entonces sí es muy fácil hablar de bienes o de servicios desde la comodidad de la capital. Allí están muchas veces, al menos en la Ciudad de México, ahí están las transnacionales, pero no está la dinámica de la frontera. Y me parece que estos errores los repetimos una y otra vez. ¿A qué me refiero? En esta frontera, o al menos en esta relación, se intercambia $1 millón cada minuto. Sí es un logro económico, sin duda, pero ¿cuántas veces hablamos de los flujos de personas? Se habla de una frontera segura, pero yo estoy convencida de que una frontera segura es una frontera donde nadie se muere, es una frontera donde se respetan los derechos humanos y donde precisamente la seguridad se basa en la legalidad, no fuera de la legalidad. Otro tema muy importante tiene que ver con la construcción de capacidades y de potencial humano. Si bien compartimos grandes recursos energéticos y si aprendiéramos a jugar como Norteamérica, seríamos todavía una mayor potencia de la que actualmente se puede ver. Sí, Estados Unidos es la principal potencia del mundo, sí, la región fronteriza es la cuarta del mundo, pero si jugáramos como Norteamérica, aún sería mucho más importante. Sería contar con energéticos accesibles y cada vez más baratos, para bien o para mal, una mano de obra barata, pero al mismo tiempo que cada vez es más sofisticada y más productiva, pero donde también nos falta aprender a jugar como socios. Y pongo un breve ejemplo antes de alargarme mucho más, y fue el TTIP. Con TTIP la negociación fue Estados Unidos-Unión Europea, que claramente se vale. Pero ¿qué pasa precisamente, por ejemplo, con la integración de los productos que se hacen en la vida de frontera y que no van a cumplir con las reglas de acumulación de origen para poder ser exportados a la Unión Europea? Es decir, México tiene un tratado de libre comercio, tiene una asociación estratégica con la Unión Europea, ahora Estados Unidos también, pero nunca lo hicimos como región y nunca lo hicimos juntos. Me parece que ahí están los grandes errores. Las negociaciones deben hacerse de manera mucho más simétrica y debe entenderse el concepto de Norteamérica, que claramente en los temas humanos al menos no se ha comprendido.
So I'm noticing that there's a sort of a theme in all of the comments that we've heard so far. There's might be a need to put more of an emphasis on the human element, humanizar, the relationships. That maybe it's not just about the volume of trade or the value of trade. It's also about social mobility. It's also about human capacity and human capital development and education. And so I would be very interested to speak with you all and together as well, you know, just to converse. What kind of things have you seen in the last 20, 25 years, or even 10 years, or even in the last 5 years? And I know you've been very involved in Mexico and all along the U.S.-Mexico border. What kind of things are we seeing? What kind of, where are we heading with that respect to really try to develop this kind of not only economic competitiveness, but also the competitiveness of our communities and our families?
Well, I certainly agree with the other panelists. I think there's a huge gap between perception and reality when it comes to the border, when it comes to the bilateral relationship. I think that's true in both countries. I do think it's changing very rapidly. I think the pace of that change is about to accelerate. If I can believe the statistics I'm given, 10% of the U.S. population now has family ties to Mexico. Mexico's not some other place, it's us. Over the last 2 or 3, I guess since 2013, since the creation of FOBESE, we have been frantically trying to increase the number of Mexican students going to study in the United States and vice versa. In 2014, we doubled the number from about 14,000, I think we got up to about 30,000. We've got about 50 university partnerships established now. And you know, I've been back in Mexico in this iteration for 6 weeks. I think I've seen 4 or 5 new ones signed just in the time I've been here. It's extraordinary. And of course, UTEP has an amazing history that long predates that of servicing the Mexican community, both undergraduates and I think they're #1 in terms of graduates, and #2 in terms of undergraduates from Mexico and in terms of numbers in the United States. So those things are critically important to changing perceptions in both countries of this region. And I would like to say one other thing. Although I think it's immensely important that we sit here and we on the border talking about the border, we need to help our countrymen in the United States and Mexico understand it's much bigger than just the border region. There are, I think, 22 U.S. states for which Mexico is the #1 or #2 export destination. They're not all on the border. People all over the United States have jobs and are making money and are making their lives better thanks to commerce with Mexico. The same is true in Mexico. And the maquila phenomena is important. I think 75% of them are on the border for obvious reasons. But it's a lot more than just maquilas. There's a car made in Mexico every 40 seconds. 70% of those cars are sold in the United States. 40% of the content of what's sold in the United States is U.S. content. So the symbiosis between these two countries is huge, and it's growing very, very rapidly. And we've got to try and help our countrymen understand what's happening and how overwhelmingly positive it is for both countries.